Today's story is called The Soup Mrs. Harper Left on Mr. Ellis's Porch. Welcome to Warm Life Stories, a quiet little corner where we slow down, breathe a little easier, and share gentle stories about ordinary people living ordinary days that somehow still touch the heart. If you enjoy quiet stories like this, feel free to subscribe or share your thoughts in the comments. We always love reading them. Now, if you're ready, let's settle in and gently step into today's story. The late afternoon sun drifted slowly across the quiet suburban street, laying soft golden lines over the porch railings of Mr. Ellis's home. It was the kind of light that didn't rush anywhere, light that rested gently, as if placing a warm hand on the day before letting it go. The boards of the old wooden porch, worn smooth by decades of footsteps, seemed to glow faintly beneath it. Every shimmer of light carried a quiet invitation to slow down, to breathe, to simply exist for a moment. A warm breeze wandered in from the far end of the neighborhood, still carrying the last hints of summer, but with a cooler edge that suggested autumn wasn't far behind. It brushed through the leaves of the maple tree in the yard, loosening one single leaf. The leaf drifted downward in a lazy, tumbling path, taking its time as if it had nowhere important to be. It landed near the porch steps with the gentlest little sound, a sound so soft it was more of a suggestion than a noise. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then went quiet again. A screen door closed with an easy thud. A car rolled past at the slow pace of a tired afternoon. Everything around him moved with a kind of shared softness, as though the entire neighborhood understood that days like this were meant to be savored, not spent in a hurry. Inside the house, the refrigerator hummed steadily, the same low, dependable tune it had offered for years. The old clock on the kitchen wall, frozen at the same time since the day it stopped ticking, caught a glint of sunlight on its glass face. Even without its movement, it felt like part of the home's rhythm, part of the gentle familiarity that held the house together. But outside was where the world felt most alive to him. The breeze carried the faint scent of distant cooking, warm, savory, drifting slowly between the houses. It moved across fences and over small backyards, weaving its way into the open air with the ease of a memory returning after too long. Something about the smell nudged a feeling in his chest, the way certain scents sometimes do. It reminded him of weekends many years ago, of quiet dinners shared with Maggie, of the soft tune she used to hum while stirring a pot on the stove. He didn't hold on to the memory tightly, he just let it sit with him, gentle as the afternoon itself. Time always felt different on this porch, slower, kinder. The sun stretched across the boards as though it wanted to linger just a little longer. Shadows slid across the floor with unhurried grace, moving like old friends who knew there was no need to rush. These were the moments he lived for now, moments that didn't demand anything from him, moments that simply arrived and stayed beside him for a while. He lifted his chin slightly, letting the warm air brush across his face. It felt like something was waiting at the edge of the afternoon, something small, something gentle, something that didn't need to announce itself to matter. A single wind chime near the porch rail gave one soft note, just one, then nothing. A silence followed, not empty but full of air, full of quiet life, full of the slow heartbeat of a neighborhood that had learned to appreciate calm. This was the kind of afternoon that could slip by unnoticed, the sort that passed through the hours like a soft whisper. But every now and then, afternoons like this carried something with them, a tiny shift, a simple gesture, a moment that found a place in someone's heart and stayed there. And on this particular afternoon, as the sun warmed the porch and the breeze stirred the maple leaves, something had indeed arrived. Something simple, something waiting quietly where Mr. Ellis had not yet looked. A small moment had found its place on the porch, ready for him to notice when the time was right. Harold Ellis sat in his familiar seat, the old wooden chair on the right side of the porch, the one that creaked just a little when he leaned back. He had been sitting in that same chair for years, long enough that the wood seemed to know the shape of him. His thin shoulders rested comfortably against the backrest, and the soft light of the late afternoon settled across his sweater like a quiet companion. He held his chipped mug, the one Maggie used to favor. The small crack near the handle had been there for as long as he could remember. Most people would have thrown it out, but he wasn't most people. He rubbed his thumb along the crack without thinking, the motion as natural to him as breathing. The mug felt warm in his hands, though the tea inside had already cooled. He didn't drink it for the flavor anymore. He drank it for the ritual, something steady, something that promised the world hadn't changed too much. His eyes, a gentle blue-gray softened by age, wandered across the yard and the quiet street beyond. He wasn't looking for anything in particular. He was just watching the world, the way a man does when he has learned that life reveals itself best when you're not trying too hard to find anything. Across the small patch of grass, in a pale yellow house with lavender curtains in the windows, lived Mrs. Harper. 72. Cheerful without being loud, warm without being overwhelming. She moved through life with the easy grace of someone who understood the value of shared meals, gentle conversations, and freshly baked pies cooling on a windowsill. She often waved at him from her yard, sometimes while watering her flowers, sometimes while carrying groceries in from her car. The two of them had developed a comfortable rhythm over the years, an unspoken neighborly friendship built on short nods, small smiles, and the occasional shared weather comment. But she was more than just a friendly neighbor. She was one of the few remaining people on the street who remembered what the neighborhood used to feel like years ago, before new families came in with their busy schedules and fast habits. She understood slow living in a way that matched his own pace. She understood quiet kindness in a way that resonated with him. Mr. Ellis wasn't lonely, exactly. But he carried a certain quietness around him, a quietness shaped by the 7 years since Maggie passed, by mornings spent sipping tea alone, by evenings spent listening to jazz on his old radio. It wasn't sadness that followed him. It was more like a soft ache, a tender longing for something he wasn't sure he needed, or even knew how to name. He didn't talk much about himself. He never felt the need. The world around him already spoke enough. The wind rustling through the maple leaves, the familiar groan of the porch boards beneath his feet, the steady routine of Mr. Clark delivering the mail each morning. These small things held him up in ways he couldn't always explain. Mrs. Harper, though, had a way of noticing him without making it known. She would sometimes leave a bundle of tomatoes near his mailbox when her garden overflowed. She once brought him a small jar of homemade jam, because it's too quiet not to share, she said with a smile. And she never knocked for long, just one tap. Then she'd step back, giving him space in the way only someone thoughtful would understand. It wasn't a dramatic friendship. It wasn't loud or remarkable in any obvious way. But it was steady. It was human. It was the kind of small connection that warmed the edges of a quiet man's life, without asking anything in return. On this particular afternoon, as the breeze moved softly through the yard and the tea in his mug cooled completely, Mr. Ellis hadn't yet noticed the little gesture waiting for him on the porch steps, but it was there, placed with care, left in kindness, and it would soon be the start of a moment he didn't know he needed. The scent that drifted through the air earlier, the warm, savory hint of someone's cooking, didn't leave Mr. Ellis right away. It lingered gently in his mind, stirring something soft inside him. He didn't chase the feeling, but he didn't push it away either. He simply let it unfold, the way memories tend to do when the world grows quiet enough to hear them. He leaned back in his porch chair, his gaze drifting toward the maple tree. A few leaves clung stubbornly to the branches, refusing to fall just yet. Their slow trembling in the breeze carried him back to another afternoon, one from years ago, when Maggie stood at the kitchen window, watching the same tree sway in early autumn. She had flour on her hands and a smile on her face, humming a tune he never knew the name of. He remembered that moment so clearly. She had been making soup, her favorite thing to cook when the seasons began to shift. The house always filled with warmth on those days, the kind of warmth that wasn't just from the stove. It was a warmth made of shared space, soft footsteps, and the kind of togetherness that didn't need words to be felt. She would call him inside with a light-hearted, "Harold, don't let it cool too much," and he'd come in pretending he wasn't waiting for her to say it. He used to sit at the small wooden table by the window, the one where the afternoon sun always landed just right. She would place a bowl of soup in front of him, gently, as if even the simple act of feeding him was something sacred. He could still remember the way the steam had risen between them, making her glasses fog up, which made her laugh every time. And he would laugh, too quietly, but fully. Their laughter back then was never loud, never dramatic. It was soft, steady, and deeply familiar, like an old song that only the two of them knew. As he sat on the porch now, his fingers curled slightly tighter around the handle of his empty mug. Memories like these didn't hurt him, not exactly. They filled him with a sweetness that carried its own small ache, the kind of ache that reminds a person they had something worth missing. Another memory drifted toward him, this one even older. A summer evening, long before the gray settled in his hair, he and Maggie had taken a walk after dinner, the sky still warm with fading light. She carried a small basket of leftover soup, her neighbor portions, she liked to call them. They stopped by Mrs. Dorsey's house, an older woman who lived alone at the time. Maggie placed the jar on her doorstep with a note and a smile, the same smile she used on everyone she cared for, whether she knew them well or not. "She won't open the door this late," Maggie had said softly. "But she'll find it. And it might make her night a little easier." End quote. He remembered the pride he felt, watching her kindness unfold so effortlessly. He remembered thinking that this simple giving, this instinct to care, was what made their life feel full. The memory faded slowly, settling into the quiet of the present, like a warm ember. A different sound pulled him back, just the faint rustling of leaves, nothing more. Yet the rustle carried another small memory. Sitting at the kitchen table alone, years after Maggie passed, listening to the wind move through the yard while he ate soup he'd heated from a can. It hadn't tasted like hers, nothing ever truly did. But in those quiet meals, he sometimes felt her near, not in a dramatic way, but in a gentle, familiar hush that reminded him that grief and love often share the same space. He didn't dwell on that memory for long. Instead, he let it fold away softly, replaced by the present moment, the warm air, the stillness, the gentle ache of remembering a life that had been rich in small, beautiful ways. And it was in the middle of this layered tapestry of memories, one warm, one bittersweet, one quietly comforting, that he finally felt something stir inside him. Not sadness, not longing, just a readiness to notice what the afternoon had brought to his porch, a small gesture, a small kindness, something waiting patiently at the edge of the moment, something that felt strangely familiar, in the best possible way. Mr. Ellis stood slowly from his porch chair, stretching his shoulders the way he always did when the afternoon grew long. His knees gave a small, familiar protest, nothing sharp, just the quiet reminder of years lived fully. He reached for his cane out of habit, though he didn't always need it, and stepped toward the porch railing to get a better look at the slow-moving street. That was when he noticed something sitting near the bottom step. At first, he thought it was just a folded towel someone had dropped. The colors were soft and familiar white with thin blue stripes, but the shape wasn't quite right for a towel alone. He squinted, adjusting his glasses. The warm air shimmered slightly, bending the image until he took a careful step closer. There, wrapped neatly in the towel, sat a small plastic container. He paused. A container, wrapped in a towel, on his porch. It wasn't something the wind could have carried. It wasn't something a child would have left by accident. It was placed there carefully, intentionally, right where he would find it if he stepped out at the right moment. He bent down with slow, steady motions, supporting himself with one hand on the railing. His fingers brushed over the towel first. It was still warm faintly, but enough that he could feel it, warm enough to say it hadn't been sitting there long. His heart gave a small, unsteady beat. Someone had stood here not too long ago. He lifted the towel just a little, revealing the lid of the container. A small handwritten note was taped across the top, the handwriting slanted slightly, familiar in its cheerful unevenness. He felt a soft breath escape him as he read the note. "Made too much today. Thought you might like some. Harper." Just those words, nothing dramatic, nothing heavy, but they landed in him like a warm stone placed gently into his hands. He held the container close to him as he straightened back up. The weight of it wasn't much, but it carried something he hadn't expected, a sense of being thought of. The kind of thoughtfulness that arrived quietly, without knocking, without asking for anything in return. He stepped inside and set the container on the kitchen counter. For a moment, he simply looked at it. The sunlight filtered through the window, landing gently on the towel still wrapped around it. The whole room seemed to lean into the moment, as if waiting for him to move. He removed the lid. A soft wave of warmth rose from the container steam, carrying a rich aroma he couldn't quite describe at first. Something savory, something gentle, something that tugged at the thread of memory still loose in his heart after all these years. He reached for a pot and spoon with slow, careful hands. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as though warming the soup had become part of a quiet ritual he didn't know he was performing. The stove clicked on. The flame rose. The pot warmed. The scent deepened as he poured the soup in a mix of vegetables, herbs, and something that reminded him faintly of the way Maggie's kitchen used to smell on autumn afternoons. He stood there, watching the steam gather and swirl, soft and steady, as if the soup itself had stories to tell. He stirred it once, twice, letting the wooden spoon glide gently through the broth. The sound was small but comforting, a sound he hadn't heard in a long while. A home cooking sound, a cared-for sound. When the soup was ready, he ladled a small portion into a bowl and carried it to the table by the window, the same spot where he used to sit with Maggie. The chair across from him remained empty, as it had for years, but today, it didn't feel quite as silent. There was a warmth in the room that hadn't been there earlier. He lifted the spoon slowly, blowing gently before taking the first taste. He closed his eyes, not because the soup was hot, not because it surprised him, but because something inside him shifted quietly, deeply, in a way that felt like the turning of a very old page. And as he lowered the spoon back into the bowl, he understood something simple. This wasn't just soup. It was kindness, left quietly on a porch, waiting for him to find it when he was ready. The first spoonful rested on his tongue longer than he expected. He wasn't trying to analyze it or compare it to anything. He simply let the flavor settle, warm and gentle, filling the quiet space inside him that had grown over the years. When he finally lowered the spoon and looked down into the bowl, something caught his eye. The carrots. He blinked once, leaning in slightly. They weren't cut into sharp slices or clean circles the way most people prepared them. These were rounded at the edges, softened into little curved pieces, imperfect in shape, gentle in form. Maggie used to cut them exactly like that. She always said, "Food tastes kinder when the edges aren't too sharp." He never understood what she meant, and she never explained. She simply smiled, cut the carrots her way, and stirred them slowly into the pot. He felt his breath catch not in pain, but in recognition. Mrs. Harper couldn't have known that. No one could have known that. It was just a coincidence. And yet, it didn't feel like one. It felt like something soft reaching across the years, landing quietly in his bowl. He lifted another spoonful, letting the warmth travel upward, into a part of him that hadn't been warmed in a while. The herbs were familiar too, rosemary, just a little. Maggie used to pinch off a tiny sprig from the plant she kept by the window. "Only a little," she'd say. "Rosemary gets shy when you use too much." He used to tease her for giving herbs personalities. But secretly, he loved it. It made the world feel kinder. He ate slowly, not because he needed to, but because the moment asked for slowness. The house around him felt different, less like a quiet shelter, and more like a space holding its breath alongside him. The afternoon light, now lower in the sky, cast a soft golden flare across the table. It made the steam rising from the bowl glow just slightly, as if the soup itself carried a small, flickering memory inside it. He placed his spoon down and rested both hands around the bowl. The warmth seeped into his palms, steady and grounding. He looked toward the empty chair across from him, the one Maggie once used. Usually, the sight carried a gentle ache, but today it felt softer. Not because he missed her any less, but because something in this bowl of soup reminded him that love, in its simplest form, often lingers in the smallest details. The window beside him rattled lightly as a breeze pressed against it. He glanced outside. The maple tree swayed slowly, and he imagined Maggie's voice drifting back to him, not words, just the memory of the sound her humming used to make on afternoons like this. A soft tune, without beginning or end. A tune meant only for the two of them. He traced his finger along the rim of the bowl, thinking of all the times Maggie had placed food in front of him with that gentle, satisfied smile. "Eat while it's warm," she'd say. She never said it as an instruction. It was always a gift, a way of caring that didn't need explanation. Another long breath left him, this one steady and full. Something inside his chest loosened, not a dramatic shift, not a rush of emotion, just a quiet untying of a knot he hadn't noticed had tightened over the years. The soup didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the loneliness or the memories or the long, quiet evenings, but it softened them, the way warm water softens cold hands. He lifted the bowl to take in the aroma once more. This time, he didn't try to name what he was feeling. He simply sat with it, the warmth, the memory, the hint of Maggie, the kindness of Mrs. Harper, all of it woven together in a moment that felt both old and new at the same time. It dawned on him then, gently, without fanfare. This wasn't just food left on his porch. It was a reminder that kindness still found him, even after the years had stretched and slowed. A reminder that some gestures, quiet, simple, unexpected, could carry the weight of something far bigger. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth settle deeper. Sometimes life spoke in large, unmistakable ways, but more often, it whispered. And today, it whispered through a bowl of soup. Mr. Ellis sat quietly at the small wooden table, the bowl now half empty and the steam rising in gentler wisps. He rested his hands on either side of it, letting the warmth seep slowly into his palms. For a long moment, he didn't move at all. He simply let the silence settle around him, filling the corners of the kitchen in a way that felt different, not heavy, not lonely, just present. He lifted the spoon once more, but halfway to his mouth he paused. His eyes drifted toward the picture frame sitting just to the right of the window, a frame he had placed there years ago and rarely touched. Maggie's photo was simple, her smile soft, her hair tucked behind one ear, her eyes bright with the quiet joy that had carried them through so many gentle days. He hadn't expected to look at her today. Some days he walked past the photo without truly seeing it. Other days, he saw it too clearly and had to turn away. But today, as the warm afternoon light touched her face in the picture, something shifted in him, something subtle, like the loosening of a knot that had been tied for too long. He reached out. His hand trembled just a little, but not from weakness. It trembled from recognition of years lived, of love held, of memories carried quietly. His fingers brushed the edge of the frame, as if asking permission to touch something sacred and familiar. The room was still. The only sound was the soft ticking of nothing because the old wall clock had stopped long ago. And yet, the moment felt full, like time itself had settled beside him just to listen. "I'm doing all right, Maggie," he whispered, not enough to echo, not enough for anyone else to hear. It was the kind of whisper meant for no one, except the heart that carried it. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. Instead, he inhaled slowly, letting the air fill him in a way it hadn't in years. He felt warmth not just from the soup or the sunlight, but from something deeper, something quieter. It was the warmth of being remembered, the warmth of being cared for, the warmth of realizing that even after loss, small acts of kindness still found their way to him. A softness spread across his face, smoothing the faint lines around his eyes. It wasn't exactly a smile, but it was close, an expression that suggested something inside him had unclenched, gently and without force. His gaze drifted back to the bowl. He lifted it slightly, cupping it with both hands, and held it near his chest. The heat seeped into him again, steady, grounding. It felt almost like holding a memory, warm, fragile, precious, in a way that didn't need words. He let his eyes close. In that small darkness behind his eyelids, he pictured Maggie standing at the stove in her old apron, humming the tune that had followed him through so many years. He didn't chase the memory. He didn't try to keep it. He simply let it rest with him, as though she were sitting in the chair across from him, not in body, but in the familiar quiet she had always loved. A breath left him, soft and deep. When he opened his eyes again, the room felt just a little lighter. The kitchen didn't look different, and nothing in the world had changed. But something in him had. A small shift, a gentle easing, a sense that the space inside him where memories lived had widened just enough to let a little more light in. He placed the bowl down softly, with the kind of care given to things that matter. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The moment had done its work. Sometimes emotions didn't come with tears. Sometimes they didn't come with grand realizations or trembling words. Sometimes they came exactly like this, quiet, warm, settling gently into a heart that had learned to live with both love and loss. And as the last bit of steam faded from the bowl, Mr. Ellis felt a warmth inside him that hadn't been there in a very long time, a warmth both old and new, familiar yet unexpected, a warmth that told him he was still capable of being touched by kindness. Even now, even after everything, even in the soft, unassuming calm of an ordinary afternoon. The next morning arrived quietly, the way most mornings did on Mr. Ellis's street. Soft light filtered through his curtains, painting gentle lines across the floor. He took his time getting out of bed, no rush, no hurry, just the steady rhythm of a man who had learned to listen to the pace of his own days. He went through his familiar routine, boiling water, setting out the chipped mug, wiping the porch rail even though there was no real dust to speak of. But something in him felt lighter, as though a small corner of the morning had been polished without him noticing. He didn't name the feeling. He didn't even think much about it. He just moved through it, letting the quiet comfort wash over him. After finishing his tea, he glanced toward his kitchen counter. The bowl from the soup was clean now, dried carefully and set aside. But the memory of warmth of care arriving in such a simple container still lingered around the room like a soft echo. He felt it in his chest, a subtle warmth settling beneath his ribs. On a small shelf near the pantry, he noticed a jar of honey. He had bought it a few months ago at the farmer's market, local, raw, sealed with a ribbon he had untied but never removed. He picked it up, turning it in his hands. The glass caught the morning light, sending a faint golden shimmer across the counter. For a moment, he simply held it. Then he nodded to himself, an instinctive, gentle decision forming without fuss or hesitation. He slipped the jar into a small paper bag, folded the top neatly, and stepped outside. The yard felt different today, not brighter, not newer, just friendlier, in a way he couldn't quite define. The breeze brushed his cheek, carrying the scent of dew and early sunlight. Toby, the neighborhood cat, watched from a distance, blinking slowly as if giving him a silent good morning. Mr. Ellis made his way across the grass toward the pale yellow house next door. It wasn't a long walk, but he took it at a comfortable pace, feeling each step as a kind of quiet affirmation. He climbed the short path to Mrs. Harper's porch and knocked gently just once. He didn't want to startle her. He never liked startling anyone. The door opened with its usual soft creak. Mrs. Harper appeared, wearing a sweater the color of oatmeal and a bright, easy smile that stretched naturally across her face. "Well, good morning, Harold," she said. Her voice always carried a warmth that felt like sunlight filtered through lace curtains. He held out the small paper bag. "I, had some honey," he said softly. "Thought you might like it." She looked surprised, not dramatically, but in the soft, pleasant way someone does when kindness touches them unexpectedly. She accepted the bag gently, almost reverently, as if she understood that the gesture held more weight than the object itself. "Oh, thank you," she said. "This looks lovely. I'll have to try it with my tea later." She paused, her eyes crinkling kindly. "And I'm glad you enjoyed the soup." He gave a small nod. "It was very thoughtful," he replied. "Very warm." There were no long speeches, no emotional confessions, just two neighbors, standing on a quiet porch, sharing a simple moment of gratitude. And somehow, that was enough. As he walked back toward his home, his steps felt steadier, not quicker, not lighter, just steadier, as if the world around him had shifted minutely into a place he recognized and trusted a little more. The sunlight touched his sweater, and he let it linger there, warming him from the outside in. Back on his own porch, he sat in his familiar chair again. The breeze lifted a strand of his white hair, and he didn't bother to smooth it down. He simply closed his eyes and listened to the rustle of leaves, to the distant hum of a lawnmower, to the quiet morning that held him gently in its rhythm. Nothing big had changed, but something small had. A small connection, a small exchange, a small gesture that softened the edges of the day. And for a man who had lived with silence for so long, that smallness felt like something whole, something steady, something quietly, beautifully enough. The afternoon drifted back into the quiet rhythm that always seemed to settle around Mr. Ellis's home, but something about the stillness felt different now. It wasn't heavier or lighter, just gentler, as if the day itself had softened its edges. He sat on his porch once more, easing into the familiar wooden chair that had carried so many of his hours. The wood creaked beneath him, a familiar sound that felt almost like a greeting. The sunlight had shifted toward evening, stretching long golden threads across the yard. The maple tree swayed lazily in the warm breeze, casting slow-moving shadows across the porch steps. Mr. Ellis watched the pattern of light and shadow drift, merge, and drift apart again. It was a small show, one he had watched countless times, but today, it felt as though the world had added a new note to an old song. He held his mug not for the tea, which had already cooled, but for the comfort of holding something warm earlier that morning. His thumb traced the familiar crack near the handle. He wasn't thinking of anything specific. Memories came and went, like soft tides, gentle, unforced, drifting through him without weight. A faint rustling came from the hedge near the walkway. Toby, the neighborhood cat, emerged slowly, tail flicking with casual confidence. The cat hopped onto the porch, stretched long and lazily, then settled near Mr. Ellis's feet. "Well," Mr. Ellis murmured, his voice soft. "You found your spot, didn't you?" Toby blinked at him as if to say the world had plenty of spots, but this one would do for now. The simple companionship made him smile, small, subtle, but genuine. His gaze drifted toward Mrs. Harper's house next door. Her lavender curtains moved gently in the breeze, and he could hear the faint sound of a kettle whistling. He imagined her in the kitchen, opening the jar of honey he'd brought her, perhaps stirring a spoonful into her tea. The thought warmed him in a way he didn't entirely expect. It wasn't the soup alone. It wasn't the honey alone. It was the quiet exchange between two people who didn't need many words to understand kindness. He leaned back, letting his shoulders relax. A deep breath filled his chest, slow and steady. He hadn't realized how tight his breaths had been lately, how carefully he had held them. Now, the air moved through him with ease, as though his body had remembered something it had forgotten about. Calm. His eyes drifted toward the empty porch chair beside him, the one that remained untouched all these years. For a moment, the sight held the familiar ache of absence. But then, unexpectedly, it softened. The chair didn't feel like a symbol of loss today. It felt like a place that still carried warmth, a place where memories could sit without hurting. He imagined Maggie's voice, faint but familiar, humming her wordless tune, the one that always floated through the house when she cooked. He didn't cling to the memory. He didn't try to bring it closer. He simply let it sit beside him, gentle and easy, like the shadow of a long-loved melody. A breeze lifted the edge of his sweater, carrying with it the scent of grass and distant dinner preparations from homes up and down the street. Somewhere, a child laughed. Somewhere else, a screen door shut. Life went on in its quiet way, as steady as the turning of the day. Mr. Ellis let the sounds settle into him. He thought, not in a heavy way but in a reflective one, about how kindness had a way of arriving softly, not with fanfare, not with dramatic moments, but in warm soup left on a porch, in a jar of honey given in return, in a neighbor's smile, in the simple comfort of being remembered. He lifted his face slightly toward the evening light. Maybe, he thought, life didn't always need fixing or understanding. Maybe it just needed noticing small moments, gentle gestures, the quiet ways people touched each other's days without even realizing it. He let that thought settle inside him without forcing it into meaning, and as the light dipped lower and the shadows stretched longer, a quiet peace moved through him, steady, warm, and entirely real. "Thank you for sitting with this story today," he whispered softly, as if speaking to the air, to the listener, to anyone who carried their own quiet aches and small hopes. The day folded into evening, calm and unhurried, and on that porch, wrapped in a gentle glow, Mr. Ellis felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense that life, in its simplest moments, still knew how to be kind.